Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is a special combined Eldridge and Company and City Talk. Today's topics: Bill and Fox, Rummy and the Generals, George and Hillary, Iraq, Pakistan and Iran, the Pope, Hugo Chavez, 2006, 2008, 2009, and more. Today's guests: Carolyn Curiel, member of the editorial board of the New York Times, former Clinton speechwriter and U.S. ambassador, and Katrina vanden Heuvel, editor of The Nation. With me is, as my co-host, is my colleague Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome. You guys get outraged often. What is the thing that outrages you most right now? What's ticking you off right now publicly? What's going on in the world that's got you?
Well, the war, this disastrous, unnecessary, unprovoked war that is looting our country's future, making us less secure. We know how we were misled into this war. You got a national intelligence estimate that came out the other day that says the war is spawning a new generation of radical extremists. War may cost this country $2 trillion. It's not going to make us safer. And only in the last few months has there really been a true opposition. Not tough enough. Papers like the New York Times cover it well, but this morning I watched some of the morning shows. They have programs on diving dogs. Where is the coverage that you need? This is so this war may cost $2 trillion when all is said and done.
Outrage?
Well, there is nothing more outrageous right now than the war. I mean, it's so completely aberrant to everything that we believe in terms of what should have happened on the front to fight terrorism, that it has no match. I mean, it doesn't have any match. On the lighter side, with those diving dogs, I really think it's an outrage that humans don't get to dive as often as the dogs do. You're talking about the swimming pools and the dogs, right?
I think there's something this morning.
Something like that. But this is exactly what has happened, and I think if you're looking at why the war has not registered all over the place the way that it is starting to now, which is people understand that there is no connection between the so-called war on terror and what we are doing in Iraq. It's that it's not easy to explain in a very short period of time. And it's easy to say, hey, dogs get a swimming pool. It's easy to say, and I know this is something you may want to bring up later, but it's easy to say, look, Clinton, mad. Not look at what he said in terms of...
Or Hugo Chavez.
Yeah, but I was going to say the other thing is that the fear-mongering that we have been treated to. I mean, we're both members of the press. I think the intimidation of... Americans, of the media, to remain cowed and silent through fear-mongering has led to a situation where the fundamental values and principles of this country have been corroded to such a point where you can turn on a Sunday show where there's serious discussion and there is a debate about what kinds of torture are permissible. I mean, this torture is un-American, but people have been led to believe that torture will make us more secure. It is the country needs to reorient itself and rethink what this war, first of all, it's not a war, but we fought other wars. This country has faced other crises without losing the fundamental values.
But we've had some political leadership. We don't have any leadership. I mean, I think along with the fact that the wars is the number one crisis that we face and terrorism, there is nobody really with the guts, or a few people, Ted Kennedy. How many other people, Russell Feingold, how many other politicians are going to stand up there and say, this war should not be?
There are a lot of people in this country, great people. I'm thinking of a loyal reader and subscriber to The Nation, the mayor of Salt Lake City, Rocky Anderson. Part of the problem, and the New York Times is an extraordinary institution, flawed in some ways, but extraordinary. But most Americans are not reading the New York Times.
Right.
You got the diving dogs. So people don't know what is going on around this country in terms of leadership and opposition, heartfelt, patriotic, real.
But you get the majority leader of the Senate saying that this proves we need to develop, the president needs to develop a new strategy. I mean, is that an answer? What is
Well,
the matter with
I have
people?
to answer on the New York Times. A lot of people read the New York Times, and a lot of the coverage that we have had has focused on the fact that.
Well, she's always said that. She's
I wish
complimented
more
you.
did.
And I think what I was referring to on the simplification was more broadcast. No
Well,
offense to
that's
all here,
also-
but I think when you're talking about leadership, which is a rare quality on the national stage, it is very difficult to put leadership into a 5-second soundbite.
Why is it a rare quality? It didn't used to be a rare quality. It really didn't.
It's hard to go into public
Something's
service.
happened to us in the last 40, 30 years.
Ronnie, it is
Since
it is
Watergate, since I don't know.
tougher than ever.
It is because
to
of
run
television,
for
all the
office
exposure,
and
the money.
fundraising.
Yeah, money.
The money corrosion.
Some of the
is-
best people
why
I know
aren't
who
we
should
have-
be running for office say, I won't fundraise.
Well, why aren't we
What gives
rebelling
me,
about
but,
that?
No, but what gives me
There's-
hope, Ronnie, is that I know, first of all, let me just say that I think there are 2 or 3 media Americas in this country in the same way John Edwards talks about 2 Americas. I wish more people read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, but most people are getting their news from a broadcast media which is over-consolidated, dumbed down, trivialized. But there are groups in this country, Progressive Majority, for example, which are training a new generation of political leaders at the state and local level. It is so tough, though. You're so right. You
It's really
expose
hard.
your life,
Absolutely.
the
I agree
money,
with you.
and the soundbite. It's not even a 5-second anymore. It's like
Yeah,
1
it's-
second. I mean, it's really the dumbing down
But you
of
know,
our
we've
public
lost
discourse.
this thing about when in doubt, resort to principle, or anything about principle. It's all polling, it's all the average stuff, it's all getting reelected. Somehow, political public service has become a career choice. So you work your way up in a ladder. I think that's destructive. On the other hand, public service is very hard for people who can't afford it. So you really have to. I mean,
It's
there's
very
something
rare.
fundamentally wrong with the
It's-
way we're doing political
It's
things.
very rare to find the common person now who can rise to national prominence. And I have said before that I think Bill Clinton will end up being the last president who came from poverty. And he did. I mean, his first home had no indoor plumbing. And you won't have that anymore. You will have a lot of wealthy people running for that office. Democracy has become skewed that way.
Or they
Oh,
become wealthy.
But I don't think, I have to say, I disagree here. I mean, I think Franklin Roosevelt was a person of great leadership who came from a patrician background. I don't think one's assets, it's one's principles and positions. But I think
Absolutely.
John Edwards, I may be wrong, didn't come from a...
No, he
But
comes
he's
from a poor
wealthy
family.
now.
I see what, but well,
Yeah.
Clinton made, but I do take to heart what you say about the problems in our system. We need to look at our electoral system, whether it's voter suppression and the machines. We need to look at the getting money out of our politics. We need to make public interest a career that appeals to
Right,
younger people. And
absolutely.
here the media feeds in too. Where is the public interest media? It's celebrity
Well,
is fun.
right.
This is fun. Now, maybe I guess you make politics, political life, a celebrity life,
Well,
which
the media also
some
has
of the
become
politicians
part of
feed
this
into.
privileged.
Right.
The media has become part of this privileged political class. I mean, they're too inside. They're cozy. They're defensive of the administration or the politicians, and that is totally
The
outrageous.
rebels are at the gate.
Are they? I hope so.
That's
Bloggers.
good.
The
The
bloggers.
bloggers. The bloggers. But
You know, there's a bit of democracy that's being introduced into opinion,
Right.
into coverage of news, and they cannot be discounted. I mean, the Times has a blog site for almost everything now.
I think
And
the
so does
blog.
the
I think
nation.
blogging is a great democratizing influence. It's the public square. It's bringing ordinary citizens into the public discourse. But I think you still need the investigative journalism.
Oh,
you need the
sure.
quality journalism,
Yes.
and the larger problem. And one of the very good commissioners of the FCC, Michael Copps, was in our office last Thursday. This fight over the very kind of boring title, net neutrality, is a very important fight, just as other media consolidation fights, because you may have a blogosphere, an internet, which part of it is controlled by big corporations, so you lose that democratizing
Yeah.
quality.
Okay, let me make a transition here to Bill Clinton and Chris
That was
Wallace.
smooth, by the way.
Thank you. I mean, was that good? I was really struck when I saw it at the anger and the tenacity with which Clinton went after Fox, Wallace, neocons, everybody. You work for the guy. I mean, this seemed like a general flame out. I mean, he blew up. What did you get?
No.
And how much of it was thespian?
Yeah.
It wasn't thespian. I mean, this is a guy who does not talk in sound bites, and that was his glory, and that was a problem too, because he thinks, he analyzes, he explains in a way that few can. He understands. He has such a comprehension of all that's going on that I can tell you that in the time that I was at the White House, he understood policy better than those who were supposed to be making it. And he taps into the greatest intellectual minds and the most common of minds. This is a man who can connect at all levels. The question that he was asked deserved the response that it got. And the response that it got was a defense of the Clinton record. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the president was not alone on this. President Clinton was not alone on this. He has, Richard Clarke wrote the book on it, basically. And he has a good reason to be angry, especially coming on the heels of that ridiculous ABC special.
I mean, that was a drama, not a docu. But I think you saw, first of all, the nation was not a great supporter of President Clinton's, but he did many good things. He allowed corporate power to dominate. He also passed a telecom bill, which maybe allowed Fox to be more powerful than it is. But you could hear in his voice the anger about the right-wing domination of our media cycle and the kind of sustained right-wing attack on his administration, his presidency. It was a continuation almost of what Hillary Clinton said many years ago about the right-wing conspiracy. But he's right to take on this craziness about how his administration didn't try to fight. I wish he hadn't said we failed, which he did, I think. But he's right to take on.
He tends to be very, he'll focus blame on himself wherever possible, because I think he believes, and I'm speaking without information from him directly, but I think he believes it adds credibility to what he's saying when he says, look, this is what I did wrong, but this is what I did right. But remember, too, that part of this, part of his response also came on the heels of him telling Democratic leaders, for God's sakes, stop being in the corner doing this.
It was like sending a signal to those candidates.
I was just thinking, as a
him.
viewer, not even looking into the analysis of the administration or their record, go on, more and more. I was so pleased that he attacked this guy,
there may have been an
pompous
element.
man who's sitting there thinking they have the power, as a lot of our Sunday morning hosts do.
Absolutely.
I mean, who are these people?
Who appointed them? Who
I worked
elected
with both
them?
of these men, with Chris and with President Clinton, and I actually like Chris.
All right, well that's good.
I think he was probably doing his job as he thought he needed to do his job at the time, and the president was doing his job as he thought he needed to do the job at the time. I saw no problem with the exchange. I thought it was a good one to happen the way it did.
But television is so scripted often that it was a great moment to see a former president get so angry. Because it was a human emotion that you don't often see on our screens unless it's a CSI
it's so interesting
drama.
That we're spending all this time talking about it. I mean, and there's so much press about it. It's just very interesting.
There were so many things going on because it was the taking on this
unusual.
ridiculous assertion by an administration and its minions that the Democrats have weakened security when they have
changing the subject to blame Clinton. It was like, excuse me, and he pointed it out. Who was the president for 8 months? The unspoken thing is not only is George Bush blown the Iraq War and Katrina, he blew 9/11. He was on the watch, didn't Condi Ray says they were at battle stations. Well, they blew it. In a sense, their failure was 9/11, so they've got to shift it to Bill.
But he was clearly also, in the back of his mind, is his wife, Hillary Clinton. I mean, and I know, but I think it's complicated because he is one of the great campaigners. He's one of the great political strategists, and it's all. One wants to take him and just say, hey, this is great that he's taking on the Bush administration. Then you have to think about the calculation. But I still think he did absolutely the right thing, and our politicians should take on those who dominate our airwaves, so many of them right-wing, or at least faux centrist, excuse the French,
But the thing with Bill Clinton is, I'm sure he is thinking about Hillary, but more, I think he is thinking about Democrats. He has become the leader of the opposition.
But that's
very
unfortunate
unusual.
for a lot of us because he's the one who brought,
I know.
who really diluted the Democratic Party to bring it more like the Republican
Listen,
Party.
I think
But he
was
won
going-
for the Democrats. He
Well,
won.
he
Democrats
didn't
didn't win for a long
No,
time.
but he
wait a
didn't
minute. He
win
won.
at the end.
He won, but he didn't win state houses. He didn't win
Right.
for his party. And I
I
think he
see.
does represent, and Hillary's a different discussion, but Clintonism
she's
did
very much the
represent
same,
a
it
kind of
seems to me.
dilution of some of the core strengths of what could be a powerful, principled
And
Democratic
what
Party.
I think helped lead us to where we are today, where we're afraid to talk out as a party, and where we let the Republicans.
Okay.
He also, I
reign.
think, fair enough on the terrorism issue, but he did squander, it seemed to me, the possibility of a post-Cold War moment, which we forget now, to strengthen institutions which aren't very popular perhaps in this country, but the United Nations, to build on issues he now cares a lot about, global warming, he's becoming a Jimmy Carter of a different
Right.
era
He
with
and
his
Gore.
extraordinary global
He and
initiative.
Gore are
In
just
many ways,
exploding
it's
out, aren't they?
easier when you're not in office.
Of course it
Absolutely.
is. Totally.
Absolutely.
Totally.
You know, forget about building consensus.
But that's
and
also
getting
another part of
the
it
votes.
is we don't see real people so much in politics anymore.
I
We
don't-
always see them as they're framed within the polls or what they think the voters want or something. So you don't get to know them, and I think that's a great loss because I think people are hungry to know somebody, to see their emotions and feelings.
What I found interesting was this notion of the leader of the opposition. In fact, because here you have, this is the danger of electing young, vigorous guys or women and then throwing them out of office after 2 terms. What do? And this may not be an emerging model, but clearly Clinton is in the position to be the leader of the opposition. Clearly the calculation is complicated by the relationship with his wife.
But
obviously.
I have to say, with all due respect to the Clintons, because listen, in comparison to this incurious George of a president, a man who, as you described, really was curious about everything and had enormous talents and
amazingly,
possibilities,
yeah.
and we haven't even discussed
smart.
impeachment, and the right wing. But it would be good for the Democratic Party if the Clintons left the building.
Okay.
I mean, I say that with respect, and it's an Elvis illusion. But the problem is the new leadership is going to have a tough time emerging with the juggernaut of the Clintons.
Who walks into the building? Where is the leadership in the Democratic Party? Who are they and what do they believe? I mean, who are these people?
Well, I don't agree that the Clintons ought to leave the stage for a number of reasons. I think Hillary has been a wonderful New York senator. She's been terrific as senator. She has not said definitively, and I don't think she's game playing, that she will run in 2008. She has every right to explore every possibility, and I think absent other leadership, Doug, you're asking that question, is there other leadership? I think there are some emerging faces and voices, but none that have been able to take, the stage and manage it well.
Who's out there? Who's out there?
Well, I mean, it's also the issues. Now, it's
Right.
interesting that Hillary Clinton has like a 95% ADA, the highest liberal rating. I think she's a higher rating than Russ Feingold for some curious reasons. She has been she's been a pragmatic senator, principled in many ways. On the war, I think she has been very calculating. She's not someone who may put morality in politics at the top of her list, but there are Russ Feingold, John Edwards, Senator Warner in Virginia. There's Bill Richardson. There's Barack Obama. There is a generation emerging, and there should be more women in politics. And with all due respect, I think Hillary and the juggernaut she's created, and she may well not run.
Yeah, she may not.
She may not, even
may
though she's
not.
building.
Sure.
You don't have a Barbara Boxer or people like that. But I would begin with the issues, and I think the race, if Hillary Clinton does run, will be it will be Hillary and the anti-Hillary, and they will fight it out over the issues.
And
at
there are
that time.
plenty lining up, that's for sure.
Why has Al Gore not taken
Al
a
Gore.
more active political role?
Well, I think if you look at what happened in 2000, he was pretty bruised. And I think it has taken him a while to figure out exactly where he wanted to play his card for the national and international stage. This is a passion for him, the environment and the global warming issue. And I think he's chosen his moment well. I think he would be a very viable candidate if he decided to run, but that's a huge, enormous if.
We need a Shakespeare to describe that showdown between Hillary and Al Gore.
but
I mean,
he,
I think it'd be very tough for him. You know him, but personally, to go through that again and lose. But again, talking about politics,
doesn't
there
kill
are
ya.
many kinds of politics in this country, and he has played.
He spoke
he's
out
been
against the war before almost anybody else.
on the war, on executive power run
Right.
amok, on the environment.
Right, he's been-
and
remember,
Move
if-
On, which has given him this platform, has been a very important player in our politics. So you could argue there are other ways of politics these days than simply the
But he
electoral.
did
Sure.
win since he won in 2000, and I can't believe that anybody who voted for him wouldn't vote for him again. That there have to be some people who voted for Bush who would vote for him. I don't know. How could he not win?
No, I mean they might vote for
Seems
Hillary.
to me
you
to
know,
be-
Or turn up the bass.
I mean,
Let's
she
go.
she's a very powerful, I think, among women, but also African American women. I mean, the polls, and sorry, Ronnie, I know you hate polls, but the polls show it's something to think hard about and think through. But
She
really
poses,
has-
I think for a lot of women, she poses a challenge because they're excited and they
About a
love to
woman,
see
yeah.
it about a woman. And
I just want to say a word for polls.
I know.
They're not all negative. I think it helps to direct energies to know what the American people really think about.
But you're supposed to also help them to understand what the situation is so they can think in a more learned way.
Absolutely, but
and
it's,
that's
I
the
don't
role
think
of
it's,
leadership, you know.
It's
and
not
I
an
think
either
too
or.
many of
I
them
think
have.
I think that the polls have a role to play in
Yeah.
politics.
But
I
if you
think
did
they
a
do
poll
if
in New
you
York
put them in the
City,
proper place.
it would be about, can I
Right.
affordable housing? How many politicians are addressing affordable housing in a real way? So
I
sometimes those polls
I
don't
think we
quite-
should take a poll to see if people like polls.
They've done that, and since I'm a survey researcher and I love polls and I make money doing it and I teach it, I'm not even going to get into this
Well,
conversation.
do you teach how to interpret polls
Oh,
and
that's-
what the role is as a leader?
Absolutely. I'm teaching
Then
a freshman
what's
honors class.
happened? Well,
Come in.
Where are the politicians? Have they taken your course?
A couple.
It's enough for family.
Not enough. Why are we arguing?
My daughter got polling.
Okay. Let's get back to Iraq. On Sunday, the generals again called out the Secretary of Defense, who's about to become the longest running Secretary of Defense in U.S. history. The longest is that famous predecessor, Robert McNamara, who conducted and also a disastrous war that Jimmy could have written about in the gang that couldn't shoot straight. What happens
Could
now?
certainly
What
write about it
happens to
now.
Rummy? What happens to the war? Is there a draft? There's so much uncertainty here. Where do we go? We got into this mess, knowingly got into this mess. Arrogance, ignorance, you name it. But we got here. How do we get out? How do we mitigate the damage that you talked about earlier?
Well, let me just say that the nation called for Donald Rumsfeld's resignation in 2003, and then since then, everyone, including the generals you referred to, it is quite an extraordinary moment, probably unprecedented, to have these high-level retired generals, many of whom remember that generals did not speak out in Vietnam,
Right.
now saying, you have overstretched this military, you are undermining our security. The opposition to this war is not really in the streets or on the left. It's there too, but it is among realists like Richard Clarke, William Odom, a former Reagan national security official, who says this is one of the greatest strategic blunders. I think American troops are now occupiers inside an unraveling civil war, inside sectarian carnage, and to do troops a service, to do this country a service, to make us more secure, we need to do everything we can to find a way out of this situation. It's not a war, it's an occupation. We have empowered Iran. I think it's very tough. I think a lot of Americans are confused. The issue of timetables, put that aside for a moment, but we must find a way out, and that isn't to abandon Iraq. Though if you took a poll, I think majority of the parliament there, majority of Iraqis would like us out. But to provide ways through peacekeeping, through humanitarian assistance, and real reconstruction aid, not this Halliburton kind, to help Iraqis, and regional diplomacy. Otherwise, I think more Americans will lose their lives for a lie, and we will be less secure, and the region will be more chaotic and unstable, if one can even imagine such. This administration misleading us into a war, it is one of the greatest abuses of power, and there will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning, and I think these generals, if the Democrats win in 2006, there will be hearings with generals talking about reckoning, which is a sight America may never have seen.
Carolyn, you're sitting there with this cat ate the canary look. What?
It is the quagmire that they said it would not become, and the question now is how do you manage the damage and get out? And those conversations have not been had in a public way, and the leadership has not been there. The fact that these generals are finally speaking out openly and calling for Rumsfeld's resignation is an interesting development. I've known for the longest time that the generals have hated Rumsfeld since the very start, because he has arrogantly dismissed anything that they say. And one thing I found out is that when you make the wives of the generals unhappy, the generals are really unhappy.
Okay.
The wives were tremendously unhappy.
Okay. Ronnie and I will be back with Katrina vanden Heuvel and Carolyn Curiel to continue this conversation. Stay tuned.
I'll be away for the election. Can I vote?
I can't leave my house. How can I vote? I just moved. What should I do?
We want to vote.
What do we do? Participate in Voter Awareness 2006 and get your answer. It's important to vote. Let's come together and make a difference. To learn more about Voter Awareness Month 2006, visit nyc.gov/voter or call 311.
Hello, I'm Doug Musio. Welcome back to the second half of a special edition of Eldridge & Company and City Talk. With me as co-host is my colleague, Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome back, guests, Carolyn Curiel, New York Times, Katrina vanden Heuvel from The Nation.
Thank you.
Katrina, you wrote an editorial in The Nation called The Devil and Mr. Bush, and it surrounds one of probably the most hated man in America this week.
I don't know. I think
Hugo
the Iranian
Chavez.
president may be that.
Oh, that's true.
But Hugo Chavez, he's, as I said, love him, hate him, revere him, fear him. He's an interesting, controversial figure. What's going on in Latin America today is fascinating in terms of an alternative model, not just Chavez, other parts, Chile, Argentina. But, when he spoke, first of all, I think he thought he was doing a Saturday show in Caracas, which is a popular show, and he's going on about the devil. He was
joking. It was.
But my sense, I think it did a disservice to his larger agenda. There's some really interesting points in there about the UN and what the UN could be doing, and also talking about America's role in the region and the world and how destructive it is for America's interests. So all I'm saying is the hall erupted in wild applause, which says something about the feelings about America in the world today. I do think out there, though, in this great world, people do make a distinction between the government and the people, I think. But that could slip away in these next months if this administration does more reckless, arrogant, crazy unilateralist.
I'm not so sure about that. We had a group, I met with a group of Iraqi women who had come over here to talk about what's happened in Iraq and to try to build some spirit and energy to oppose the war, and they were shocked at the amount of anti-war sentiment they found. And their rationale was that America is a democracy. And we think in a democracy, the leadership follows the will of the people. So I'm not quite sure how it gets interpreted. But I think that we should have listened. It's unfortunate that he was with the histrionics, with his histrionics. Histrionics. I'm getting to sound like Bush.
Nice.
Anyway,
I do not misunderestimate yourself.
Thank you.
Clouded the message. I think you're perfectly right. It was a very serious message.
I think America, first of all, the government, but Americans would do themselves a service if they listened. If they listened and sort of understood a little more about what is going on in this world.
They follow the headlines and the stories on the press, and what was that? But
I think the effect of Hugo's histrionics was to actually help the president's ratings a little bit. Americans do not like when somebody from the outside criticizes those who are in the inside, because we all still, at the very end of the game, consider ourselves part of the same team.
Right.
And I think we're seeing a little bit of that now. It's interesting. I was saying during the break that I was visiting my folks in Indiana, and my dad watches Univision and all the Spanish language networks, and so he saw it analyzed up one side and down the other, and he was just filled with umbrage when I came home. He said, "I can't believe that Hugo would say that about our president," and he just went on and on and on. And my dad is, not cheerleading for the White House right now at all, but he does watch a good variety of news shows. So I think that is the attitude, is that how dare he?
But he did go on, by the way, Chavez, and this was on CNN to its credit. They had a reporter from Venezuela talk about sort of how Venezuelans might react to this. But also, Chavez did go on to say he hoped to have better relations with the next administration. A lot of people who don't read the New York Times may not know that the Bush administration has supported a coup against Chavez. So the guy's sort of angry, he's a little pissed off. And it's not the first time. I mean, Americans, we haven't had leaders. I mean, people don't remember Khrushchev, who came and banged his shoe. And, you had other people who come. But, I agree that the personalization of politics, the name calling, it would be great if it sort of ended all the way around.
But it's important about the United Nations. I mean, I'd like to see Bolton out of the United Nations, and it's interesting that he hasn't been confirmed yet and what that question is going to be. But when we talk about Iraq and the world, the United Nations needs to be supported.
The United Nations is a crucial
very
instrument.
Important thing for us.
It's in our self-interest. I mean, both in the most pragmatic economic way, but also in the interest of collective security, so America's not on the line. And what it does for things people don't pay a lot of attention to, but in terms of pandemics, in terms of just engaging the world.
Ordinary diplomacy and relations with other countries and in the world.
But diplomacy's like a D word. I mean, this administration hasn't seen a treaty, hasn't seen a diplomatic intervention that they don't want to, not only don't like, but don't want to undermine. And I think we're seeing the limits of military power in such vivid ways these days, whether in Iraq, whether in Lebanon, and the UN becomes a crucial force for the world to meet.
And America, we lied to the UN also and manipulated the UN about Iraq. So I just don't. That has to be a rebuilding of confidence in the American public, because I think the Bush administration has torn it down.
On Iran, the danger of a kind of Iraq redux, I think we could talk more about that, but I think that is where people now, including legislators, I'm not talking about the crazy neocons, are listening to one UN institution, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a UN institution, which could, if it had played more of a role, we wouldn't be in the disaster we are in Iraq now.
Alberti won the Nobel Prize for his honesty in bucking the administration. The Bush doctrine's dead, obviously. This preemptive hyperpower hubris seems to have died in the deserts and the cities of Iraq. What replaces it? What is the hard-headed, realistic, non-ideologically driven foreign policy that we conduct?
I'm not sure it's dead.
We don't have it.
I don't
think it's dead either.
I don't think it's dead.
Okay. It's ill. You're right.
Aren't we
It's
still
ill.
bringing democracy?
You're right.
I think
Wrong
that
word.
if you look at how the approach has played out, it's that anything can be handled politically. And Karl Rove is working very hard right now, as is Ken Millman, to make sure that there is an explanatory narrative that's going out all over in advance of the November elections to explain away all that has happened, and to make the case that if you want your security ensured, you have to vote with them. So I'm not sure it is dead. I think that it may be, there may be less, in the way of trumpeting, but it's there. I
guess I hope someday that reality will be reality. I mean, I think, one of Bush's advisors said to a very good journalist about a year or so ago, Ron Suskind, you people live in like a reality-based world. We live in our own, ideological. And I think that what's happened to truth and reality and the ability to distort it is not new in politics. I'm not saying it's new, I'm not naive, but it's risen to a certain level where you have this kind of ability on the part of Rove or Mellman to make people believe that they are more secure and the most insecure. Now, the good news or the bad news is that 3 years after 9/11, a majority of Americans, not a vast majority, now see there was no connection between 9/11 and Iraq.
I picked that up in Indiana as well.
Yeah, that's important.
It's the first time.
Talking about polling and the quote-unquote sophistication and ignorance of the American people, the fact that 50% could have believed that.
It's interesting. If you look at the United States, I see 4 areas. The Northeast is where a lot of the political money comes out of. I mean, every single candidate comes through here to raise money, right? The South is where it's make or break. It has been for the Republicans. They need to sew up the South, so it's the votes. The West seems to be trends right now, environment, all of that. The Middle West, where I come from, seems to be where the family values issue has resonated in major big ways. And it seems to lag behind in so many ways where the East is and even where the West is and sometimes even where the South is, because these are people rooted in real common sense and they want you to, it's show me.
Right.
Show me why that is. And for the first time, and I go to see my parents regularly, they're in their 80s, and for the first time I heard that Iraq and terror are not associated in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. But there is almost an Orwellian elegance to the way the Bush administration has succeeded in defining the narrative, telling the narrative.
It's not just the Bush administration. Let's understand that it's the media. First of all, I think any politics, particularly a progressive politics that blames people as its starting point, is dead on arrival. You talk about people's ignorance. If you're working 2 jobs and you do a dose of radio 5 minutes, clear channels, or you get your local paper where there's very little news about the world, a lot of diving dogs.
Sure.
How are you able to make an informed decision in a democracy and be a citizen? Don't want to be too pompous.
Let's not forget just how unbelievably overstretched everybody is.
Right.
You don't have time to keep up with everything.
It's rational not to.
Whether it's 2 jobs. We haven't even talked about how is it that this administration can actually get up there and talk about the it's the Main Street versus Wall Street.
Right. Go.
Look at what working people in this country are stretched so thin. Yet and it's not just the inequality; it's the corporate power and the share of the wealth that working people have created. They are not participating in. People can say, as they do sometimes, "Oh, then you're socialist." I'm talking about shared prosperity. I'm talking about the ability to share in the wealth of this country and to have some kind of countervailing power, which labor and unions used to be, which are decimated, or at least a new social contract, which has been shredded.
But to talk about that, the whole notion of the declining and the endangered middle class between the layoffs, the loss of pensions.
The lack of social mobility, the inability to pay for education.
Increasing poverty. So you've got all of these indicators suggesting that middle, which didn't benefit from the tax cuts, is being squeezed.
You're working a lot harder just to keep. I have a brother who works for United Airlines. Pension was just cut to shreds. They'll depend on the federal system to take care of them. But I remember what Bill Clinton said when he talked about jobs creation, and the goal in the Clinton administration was 8 million jobs created during the first 4 years, and that goal was achieved. But he said himself, he said, we talk about jobs creation, and somebody came up to me and he says, "Yeah, I believe you're creating that many jobs. I have 3 of them."
Yeah, that's a good. That's wonderful. But here's the problem. Our electoral system, we've talked about sound bites, is not equipped to talk about the painful realities. That, in terms of a real economic policy, talk about education and retraining is only going to take you so far. The need for actual investment in the economy, public investment, at a time when even the Democrats are talking about the most important thing is reducing the deficit. No, the most important thing is investing in a country and creating jobs and building the infrastructure that will allow America to be truly secure.
So alleviating poverty, which is going to include some sort of a health care system that we don't want to get into politically.
Aren't you struck by the lack of common sense in the general policies that the government, that our politicians frame, and the way we react to it? It's just it's sensible to do certain things and not sensible to do other things, and we proceed to do it. But the news, we do operate on this parallel of you can read the New York Times, and on the front page it's one thing, and on page 10 there's something that totally contradicts what the administration has just said, and yet people don't tie it together. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about immigration and jobs and what that means.
I wanted to talk about immigration. Pat Buchanan's got a new book, and he's
former White House speechwriter.
Former White House speechwriter.
Former Nation author, I can't believe it. Wrote in 1962 about St. Louis prisons. We haven't had him back in.
Nice. We don't know this.
All right, let's
go. He's calling for the impeachment of George Bush, not because of Iraq, but because he hasn't secured the border against Mexican Americans. And I saw him on one of the talk shows where there is this plot where the Mexicans are going to be, Mexican Americans or Mexicans, are going to be such a large proportion of what was once Mexico that they're going to become, there's going to be a movement to become part of Mexico again. Now, given...
No.
Go. Talk to this.
Look, my dad came up from Mexico. He was a U.S. citizen. He was born outside of San Francisco. But, you know, I think I'm thinking right now of a conversation I had just last week with somebody who was working on immigration policy, former congressman who is very intelligent, who said that, you know, people in my hometown, he said, see Hispanics and they're, you know, taking over the area and they're really upset and they think they're there illegally, and they probably are. And he said that a couple times. I said, excuse me. Most of us are here legally. Yeah. You know, the largest growing part of the population is Mexican American. But these are people who have been here, many of whom were born here, some of whom predated that part of the world becoming part of the United States. What we have now is a population of about maybe 12 million people who are not here with documentation that is proper. Many of them are not Hispanic. Many of them have overstayed visas. Many of them came from countries like where I represented the U.S., Belize, Central America. Some come from Asia, some come from Europe. Some look like you. Some look like me. How do you get rid of these people, which is what...
Talk about insanity, lack of common sense.
It's utterly insane. It is not doable. If there is one person who has been speaking common sense on these fronts, many of the fronts that we've been talking about, and here's something controversial, Michael Bloomberg.
Bloomberg. Right,
Michael
exactly.
Bloomberg.
Our economy would fall apart.
The man is built on common sense.
Right,
he is absolutely amazing. He is no baloney. He will give it to you the way that it is. And he has been talking about immigration. He says, there's no way you're going to get rid of 12 million people. Get real. Figure out a way to make them citizens.
And we need them.
And we need them.
Or some of them don't even want to be citizens. And some of them just want to come here to work.
If existing law were applied, including sanctions on employers, this would be such a lesser issue. It's just that when the economy starts hurting, you look for a target. And immigrants look like a pretty good target.
Well, it is a target that I think the administration is just...
I think it's going to fracture the Republican Party, though.
I've just come back.
They know it.
We were just in Arizona. On the border, from Tucson down to Douglas, Arizona, to Nogales, Arizona, to Lukeville, which are all points of a lot of entry. The thought of building how long? 700 mile
20-mile fence, something.
No,
they got a lot of bidders.
700 miles of the fence.
Boeing.
$2 billion is the most preposterous thing in the world.
I'd be bidding too.
Excuse me, they're building a wall around Baghdad. So
I know we can do it, and trenches. No, they're building trenches around Baghdad.
It's like the Majno.
But if you go down to the border in some of these border towns, people look at you as if they don't think this is so bad. I mean, they don't think. As one person said, we browned out a long time ago. There is so much intermarriage and such a culture that is such a mix, and people are very happy.
I think people haven't looked at the rest of the hemisphere. I think this is part of the problem.
Canada, they all talk about
and
people
also
in
the
Mexico,
birth rate. Hispanics tend to have children at a larger rate than non-Hispanics.
There's a race in Arizona, which is an important litmus test. I think the 8th district, so they have this ultra right-wing conservative Republican who is a Minuteman, and I think the party's in a panic about it because they know he's going to lose.
It's a woman who's running against him.
Hate is not winning out. At least I don't think it is. If you look at what's happened to George Allen.
Yes.
Well, that'll be a litmus test. If he wins, that's a tough one to say. Hey,
you expect that your life is going to be examined when you get into public office, and it should be. I don't think he expected that 2 former colleagues from college would come forth. And now people are starting to look at him with different eyes, I think. And I think the same is going to happen to those who are really hitting the hate drum on immigration.
It's an important moment, I think, with Allen, because we've seen a mainstreaming, I think, certainly in the Republican Party, of views that were once considered out of bounds in a way. I mean, like the David Duke Minuteman stuff coming into part of the mainstream of the Republican Party, and with Allen, don't forget that Ronald Reagan made, I think, what was his launch speech at the site where those 3 I think this is the case, where the 3 civil rights workers were slain. I mean, made no reference to that. I mean, it was part of, and now, I mean, just related to that, what worries me going into this election is the voter suppression stuff. The machines get a lot of attention, but the attempt to do a kind of newfangled Jim Crow with these IDs and all of that is a measure, which is a measure of the Republican Party.
Of the new registered of new voters were disqualified in Arizona? Is that
It's a measure of the Republican Party, it seems to me, has always wanted to reduce the vote,
Right.
whereas the Democrats, if they could get out more of the vote, it's not as simple, but the majority of this country is still non-voters. In the South, in particular, would be a base for the Democrats. And I think the demographic shifts, though you follow and know more about this, it seems to me that the demographic shifts in this country, particularly the Latin American, immigrants, will make a big difference for the Democratic Party, with the Republican Party at the moment not very open.
Not with a great degree of certainty. I mean, they
On
probably
social.
will. They probably will, but a lot of Hispanics are turning Republican. It's not a done deal that they're with the
Right,
Democratic
right.
Party. But I think it is occurring
Why is
to
that?
those
Is that more family values?
deep
Is it
religious
religion?
Culture,
values,
religion.
not just Roman Catholicism. Many have turned
Yeah.
to evangelical
Evangelical,
faith,
yeah.
and that counts for a lot. And I think that there is a feeling that the Democrats have been out of step with that. I kind of wince sometimes when I hear the Democrats trying to get on board with religion, because
Well,
it
of
just
course, we're all forgetting the
it's-
separation of church and
it's
state, right?
either but you know what, either it's natural and it's part of your life, or it's not,
Right.
and either you broadcast it or you don't. I think many as a Roman Catholic, we're reticent about our faith. Proselytizing is not part of what Roman Catholics typically do. We also don't go around, quoting the Bible, although I had to learn the Bible inside out when I was working for Bill Clinton. But I think what we're seeing here is the realization among those politicians who are trying to formulate strategies that we don't work with hatred. Hatred is something that the American people will get their backs up on when they see that certain groups are being marginalized out, targeted for hateful comments. Look at what happened with Mel Gibson, George Allen. I mean, we're seeing a pattern here. And I think there will be an attempt to soften some rhetoric. I don't know if it'll happen in time for this election, probably not, but before 2008.
Yeah, but the hatred might not work, but the fear certainly does. And I just wanted to, another one of my great transitions, moving into Mike Bloomberg. Mike Bloomberg in Rolling Stone said that we were unnecessarily freaking out over terrorism, both implying that there is this aura of fear out there, but also making another point that there were far more dangerous things in our lives, statistically, like smoking and other health-related things, than terrorism. But are we freaking out over terrorism? Is the threat overstated? Is it a tool for the policy agenda and politics of this administration and its allies?
Well, I think once they called it a war, once you buy into this is a war on terror, you build the fear factor and you hyper-militarize it. Terrorism is a brutal tactic, a brutal method. Countries in Europe have lived with terrorism for decades and have learned to manage and deal with it. Hyper-militarizing terrorism, as we have done, as this administration has done, is fueling the extremists. It's not. I think we need. And my view is, I do think there's been too much fear about it. It's been stoked by administration, by the media. Of course, one needs an effective policy to fight terrorism, but you also need to understand other threats have become. We forget about diseases. We forget about other factors that are the real security of this country.
But don't you think the administration has given the impression that there is a defense against terrorism, and in fact, isn't terrorism the kind of thing where they're really, that's what it is the surprised, unexpected kind of thing? I mean, to think that we can be totally safe from terrorism by a physical thing, either by the border or by anti-missile things or stuff like that, is so misleading, because I think there are certainly sensible places like
we should begin by implementing the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission, which this administration gets a D or a D- on.
And they didn't want in the first place.
But it is true that unless America changes, reduces its profile, particularly in the Middle East, particularly in a military posture, and changes the conversation, if one can, from a cultural and religious one to an economic development one, or addresses legitimate grievances without. I mean, you never fear to negotiate, you never negotiate out of fear, but this administration, and I fear the Democrats to a large extent, though they are far better, have bought into the war on terror. The war is winnable. It's a political. You can't say
We're all
the
going to
war
have
is-
to live with the fear. I think when you fly, you always don't you think about it a little bit when you fly a little bit when you cross.
Before terror entered in, I think a lot of people got on the plane wondering if it would crash.
Exactly.
You know, and
Now you're afraid of
now
flight.
you're afraid of
I
other
was
things. So I think
hijacked.
we've redirected.
You were.
Well, I was hijacked many years ago by someone who wanted the release of Sirhan Sirhan, Rudolf Hess, and 5 Serbo-Croatian terrorists. This was in 1978.
Sorry.
So,
Didn't
you
mean
know,
to
we
laugh.
remember the rash of,
Yeah.
Yes.
of
Right.
hijackings, and it was in
Right.
that period, Entebbe, Mogad.
Right.
So I'm just saying it's not new. What's
Right.
new is, of course, the trauma
Of seeing that thing.
that
But we've been led to believe that there is a protection that.
And that's fight
Well,
them over there,
but
not fight them
Americans
over here.
believe that the protection is working to some degree because, look, the Brits were able to stop something that they
Right.
said was a plot, and so
Right.
you can't take shampoo on board. I think today you can
Yeah,
start
they
taking
changed
the
it,
little
yeah.
the little toiletry size, but.
That's
It's an
another
interesting
also
thing that what
because
happened.
We've read about arrests and stuff, and then we never read the resolution. You know, Ashcroft certainly made several announcements about the different things that he had found and investigated, and then it just disappears. So we don't. You know.
But it's interesting what happened with what the Brits did.
Yeah.
It actually helped George Bush, and it did not help Tony Blair.
I know. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
It shouldn't have helped George Bush because what the Brits did was what he made fun of John Kerry
Right.
calling for, which was effective policing, effective intelligence, effective law enforcement, and not going into Iraq or taking the
So
war
Americans
to the
more
terrorists.
gullible than the British?
No, I think that we are more bruised right now, and I think that we're grasping. The people are grasping at anything that ensures that they are safer.
Okay. Let's move to elections. 2000.
Do we need to?
Yes, we have to. You don't want to be depressed? Tough. 2006, 2008. Do in fact the Democrats take control of the House? And if they do, to get to a point that you mentioned earlier, Katrina, there will be investigations, there will be hearings, there will be.
There will
First
be
of all, how many-
accountability.
There will-
Accountability.
How many seats do we need? Do the Democrats need to take control? Does anybody know?
15 in the House,
15.
6 in the Senate.
Right.
6 in the Senate. So what are the chances the Democrats are going to get control? Anybody know? How will we know?
Never say never.
Polls.
I think you can have the Howard Dean response, the Rahm Emanuel
Right, right.
response,
And it's also
in
Twitter. You don't
reality-
believe any of it. What?
In reality, probably not tremendously likely, but possible. Certainly possible.
I think in these last few weeks, the trends have moved in a direction away from the Democrats taking back the House. But who knows?
You
I mean,
can't
what the
tell.
what the Republicans
local.
have done, they've made every effort to localize and slime. I mean, the story about how they're going to fund enormous amounts of opposition research. They want to do everything to not allow this to be a national referendum
Right.
on Bush's failed policies.
Right.
My sense, and this is what goes back to something you said about democracy and how the Iraqi women's group thought, well, you know, this is a turning point because 2000 was different. Al Gore won. 2004, we were coming right out of into the sort of security moment. Now it's a chance people finally see that there's no connection between 9/11 and Iraq. But if the Democrats don't take back a House, it's a very difficult. It's a crisis moment for democracy in the sense that it's a one-party state. You have no accountability. You have an executive run amok
And a court
a
system.
wanton assertion of executive power in the name of security. And it could be a constitutional crisis.
What's going to
Go ahead.
I know I was going to ask, what do you think about Lieberman and Lamont? Is that a race is that a viable race?
Oh, God, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
I think, Ned Lamont is a novice politically and has a long road to go against a seasoned politicker like Lieberman. But I think, Lieberman has gotten so much support from the Republicans, including Michael Bloomberg, who is fundraising for him, that he has become formidable in his independence.
JPAC is also. Right?
I mean,
Yeah.
Michael
A lot
Bloomberg
of
is
the
sort of
pro-Israel
extinct
people are
moderate
very
Republican.
strong.
It's not
Right.
that as the Ken Melmans and the RNC pouring money
Yeah.
into. I mean, Lieberman legitimizing Bush's attacks on the Democrats as making us weaker is just it's obscene. And I think also I have to say the media coverage of the Lamont-Lieberman race, with the exception of the fine New York Times editorial endorsing Lamont, you had people like Joe Klein, going on about this McGovernite, peacenik,
Yeah, of the
Lamont,
leftists.
and leftist. It was
Unbelievable.
ridiculous. Lamont is like in the mainstream of Connecticut on the war in Iraq. He's also speaking to larger issues. And last I heard, elections, primaries particularly, were about giving voters a choice. It was as if Lamont, this upstart, had decided to do an end run around democracy. I think it's an important race. Connecticut's a quirky state for all the obvious reasons. Lowell Weicker, independence.
Sure.
I think if the 3 Democratic seats in Connecticut go down that are very promising and that the Democrats need, particularly New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut,
Sure.
Joe Lieberman is to blame.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Joe Lieberman is to
Absolutely.
blame because he's made.
Well, he's
he's
always
been
been-
lackluster in support of those 3
He's
Democrats.
always been so self-motivated. He's one of the people who's made it his career. I mean, the fact that he ran for vice president of the United States and re-election to the Senate at the same time was so appalling to me.
It guaranteed a majority for the Republicans in either event.
Right,
Yeah.
and neither
Absolutely.
of any, there were tiebreaker or an outright majority.
Yeah.
Okay, we only have 2 minutes. 2008, Democrat. Who was the Democratic candidate? Who's it?
Well, you've got several guns out there. The 2 that ran last time would like to get back
Right.
into the picture, Kerry
Hillary.
and Edwards. Hillary is a possibility. She is not committed despite what people think. You've got Bill Richardson in New Mexico, who I think would make a very attractive candidate for a lot of reasons. You've got even Evan Bayh out of Indiana, who is interested in running.
Joe Biden, maybe.
Yep, Joe Biden, maybe.
Russell Feingold,
Russell Feingold.
Mark
Right.
Warner.
Right.
Warner.
What about the Republicans?
Al Gore, I'd like
And
to
I'd
keep
let Al
saying,
Gore
I
again,
think
yeah.
Al Gore
I
should
think-
not be forgotten.
Okay. What about the
won't be.
Republicans?
Yeah.
I think McCain is one of the most dangerous men in American
I
politics.
agree with you totally.
I mean, you know,
Quixotic.
all of these negotiations around the detention interrogation legislation, what do they come out with? It's an amnesty bill for torturers. The New York Times, The Nation, has editorialized a lot about this. He has a veneer of independence.
Yeah.
He has the sense of speaking his mind, but he's at risk of
He's-
the
you can't
pandering.
predict
And
what
as we
he's
said
doing.
earlier, could he just get a studio? A bed in one of those Sunday morning talk shows because he's there all the time. His health, I don't know. But I do think the Hillary issue becomes important, not just who will be the anti-Hillary in the Democratic Party, but what the climate of the electorate is and who the Republican opponent is. I don't think Mr. Allen has a
Right.
long career ahead of him after some of this.
Possibly not, but he may come back.
15 seconds.
interesting.
Mike Bloomberg in 2008. You love him.
You know, I think that he is somebody who could be very influential in the race. He certainly has not. You know, the person who seems to be driving all of this is Kevin Sheekey. Everybody knows
Right.
that. Kevin's not even quiet about it. But, you know, Michael Bloomberg is an incredibly smart, corporately trained leader who has done an amazing job on the economic front with the city. He's trying to round out things by taking a national profile on a lot of things, taking a very common sense approach on gun control, immigration, health, smoking, etc. And time will tell, but he may be able to be talked into it. But no independent is ever.
I don't thi-
Well, he could be a Ross Perot figure, but until we
sane
bust
Ross
open
Perot.
our electoral system, the duopoly, it's hard to see him doing an independent run, which he could with his resources.
Okay. Thank you. This was fun. This went quick. You have to come back. You're coming back. Yes?
Tonight.
No, tonight. Thank you.